Great. All right, good evening, everyone. That's a bit...
Sorry.
All right, we'll try this again. Okay, great, no echo. Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephanie Marshall. I am the Deschutes County Hearings Officer assigned to the matter this evening. It's Tuesday, August 31st, 2021, and it's 6 p.m. I'm going to be presiding over file number 247-21-00400-PA and 401-ZC. I'm going to go through my introductory remarks and then turn it over to staff to go over the Zoom and public hearing participation protocol. So at the outset, I wanted to state that I've had no ex parte contact, which means no contact outside of this hearing room by any member of the public, any person interested in, supportive, or otherwise with respect to the application. I've communicated with staff only to the extent of scheduling this hearing and receiving the staff report. My decision this evening is I'm not going to make a decision this evening, but my decision following the hearing this evening will be based on the record. The record is comprised of materials that staff has received thus far, and any evidence that is received this evening, testimony or documentary, and if the record is left open, any evidence received during that time period. I have no interest in the outcome of this application, and I believe I can hear this matter in an unbiased way. So at this time, I will ask if there are any objections to my hearing the matter this evening.
Does not look like there's any indications of objections.
Great. Yeah, I usually try to give it another little bit longer of a pause with the Zoom participation. All right, so we will proceed with the hearing, and we're going to start with the staff presentation, who will go over not only the staff report, but at the outset, the protocols for participating in this hearing remotely. And following staff, we will hear from the applicant, and then following the applicant, we will hear any testimony in support of the application, any neutral testimony, and then any testimony opposed to the application. Then we will hear from staff one more time if they wish to address anything presented at the hearing, and final remarks by the applicant. And at that time, we will take up any request to leave the record open if one is presented this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to just share my screen here very quickly. I have a short PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, so today we have, just as Ms. Marshall had said, the file number is 247-21-000400-PA and 401-ZC. It is for a plan amendment zone change. For the record, my name is Tarek Rawlings. I'm an associate planner with the Community Development Department. And I just want to take a few moments here to orient those members of the public who are joining us via Zoom, and to explain how members of the public will be called up to testify, whether they've joined us via Zoom or by telephone. Also, should the county's internet connection be interrupted, we will attempt to get back online as soon as possible. If this happens, please give us a couple of minutes to get the public hearing active before you attempt to link or call back in. If your own connection gets interrupted, please attempt to join back using the same link or phone number you used initially. In Zoom, there are two categories of participants: panelists and attendees. As a panelist, your microphone and video will be active for everyone to hear and see you. Also, as a panelist, you have the ability to mute your microphone and/or black out your video, which I'll describe more in a minute. As an attendee, your video will not be active, and the county's producer will control your microphone. This is an important distinction because anyone wishing to testify via Zoom will be promoted to panelist so that the audio and video can be recorded. At this point, I'm going to ask our producer to promote all participants to panelists so that I can explain some of the functionality associated with Zoom, which is specific for panelists. Yeah, no worries. All right. So everyone's been promoted. So for those of us joining us via Zoom, please look at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, and you'll note that there's a button for your microphone. If you press this button, you'll mute your microphone. I point this out because during your testimony, you may want to confer with your legal counsel or your client. You can use this button to mute your microphone so that your conversation is not recorded. To the right of the microphone button is one for video. By pressing on this button, you can black out your video. Again, during your testimony, you may want to confer with your legal counsel or your client, and using this button, video button, will allow you to black out your video if you need to. To the right of the video button is one for participants. By pressing on this button, you can see the list of everyone who has joined the hearing via Zoom or by telephone. Members of the public will be called up for testimony in the order that they appear in the participants list. So go ahead and press the participants button. And at the bottom of the participants list, you'll notice there is a button to raise your hand. At this time, I would like each person joining us in Zoom to press the raise hand button only if you would like to testify this evening. I'll take a moment to note everyone who wants to testify. And it looks like it's just Pat, is that right? All right. And so can we hear from Pat? I just need to get a mailing address and a full name, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Sure, Patrick. Good evening. Patrick McCoy, MCCOY, and my address is 21435 Modoc Lane, Bend, 97702.
Very good. Thank you very much, Pat. Good evening to you. And yeah, we got you on the list for testimony. So is there anyone else in Zoom who would like to testify? And if yes, please raise your hand now. And we do have, looks like Matt Carey may be the only other raised hand at this time. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind giving us your full name and mailing address, that would be great.
It's Matt Carey, and address is 61765 Gibson Drive, Bend, 97702.
Very good. All right. And any other participants that would like to testify this evening that are joining us via Zoom, please raise your hand at this time. Oh, and we have, Pat, did you have another comment there?
Yes, I have someone else with me that would also like to testify.
Certainly, yeah. And what's their name?
I'll let her skip.
Hi, my name's Keisha, Kecia Weaver, Weaver. Address is 21435 Modoc Lane, Bend, 97702.
Very good. Good to see you, Keisha.
Thank you.
All right, so those are the three we have had a raised hand from so far. Are there any other Zoom participants who would like to testify this evening? If so, please use the raised hand button to raise your hand to indicate that. And that might be it, I believe. Okay, so then moving along here. Phone testimony. I don't know if we have any phone callers this evening, so we will skip this portion of it. It looks like it's just Zoom participants tonight and people that are, there are some folks in the room today, so you'll hear from them and they'll be on video and audio as well. With respect to oral testimony, the hearings officer and staff are responsible for ensuring a respectful and orderly hearing. Any testimony or behavior which is inappropriate will be addressed and may result in that member of the public being removed from the hearing. In addition to oral testimony, you may want to submit written testimony. If you intend to submit written testimony into the record, please email it to me at the conclusion of the hearing so that I can include the testimony into the record as soon as possible. If your submittal is more than 20 pages in length, includes any color figures, or includes any documents which should be printed larger than 8.5 by 11-inch size, then you'll need to submit the testimony both electronically and as a hard copy. Are there any questions so far about Zoom or anything we've discussed so far? Please just use the raise hand button if you have any questions. And seeing none, are there any objections at this time to the format of the hearing using Zoom and phone participation? Again, if you have objections, please raise your hand to indicate so. And seeing no objections, I'll ask the producer to move everyone except for the hearings officer and staff to attendee status. At the end of my oral staff report, I'll call on participants one at a time to provide testimony. I'll go in the order that I listed you all. And then when I call on you, you'll be elevated back to panelist status. At that time, you'll encounter a short delay while you're being elevated, and that's normal. And with that, I'm going to begin my staff report here. So the subject property is a 36.65 acre property. It's east of the City of Bend's urban growth boundary. It's got an address of 61781 Ward Road. And today, really, the proposal is for a changing of the county's comprehensive plan amendment map designation from an agricultural designation to what's called a rural residential exception area designation. So that's the plan amendment portion of this proposal. And then there's also a zone change component to this proposal where there's a proposal to change the current zoning from exclusive farm use to multiple use agricultural 10. One feature of this proposal is it does not require a Goal 3 exception because there's a private soil study submitted that has been verified by the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And the record also includes a private traffic study that's produced by a traffic engineer. There were numerous public comments received. They were mostly centered around these 5 sort of issue areas, these categories you can see on your screen here. They centered around potential traffic impacts, mostly within the road systems of the City of Bend's subdivisions to the west of this subject property. There were concerns, people had expressed that they had historically used this property for open space and recreation uses somewhat, hiking and walking around and things like that. And that there were concerns that those types of uses would no longer be available to them and their neighborhoods. There was a concern that this proposal would lead to a loss of farmland in the county and farm use. There were pretty limited comments related to just general concern about any kind of marijuana production or cultivation on the subject property. Kind of whether in conjunction with this proposal or not. Those were fairly general concerns for the marijuana, but focused on an opposition towards any kind of cultivation or production. And then there were concerns about growth management implications, whether there were enough utilities in place and whether there was orderly growth really being vetted for any kind of mostly specific future development at that point. There were also a couple of last-minute record additions that came in yesterday. One is an agency comment from Henry Stroud with Bend Parks and Rec. He was essentially reaching out to the property owner, Central Oregon Irrigation District, to try to initiate a conversation about establishing private easements along the canal corridor for the purpose of recreational trails. I had responded and said that could very well just be an entirely private matter, or that comment could be reviewed by the hearings officer tonight, should you choose. There was also a second comment issued. It was a public comment in opposition, similar to the other oppositional comments received. This was from David and Nancy Morrison. They're a neighboring property owner to the west of the subject property there. And their concerns focused mostly on potential traffic impacts. Again, general, concerns about growth management, and then wildlife concerns about potential impacts to wildlife that they had observed on the subject property. The next steps after this public hearing is that the hearings officer can continue the hearing to a date and time certain, close the hearing and leave the written record open to a date and time certain, or close the written and oral record entirely. And with that, I'm available for any questions you might have for this evening. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you for your presentation. I don't have any questions at this time, but would like to turn it over to the applicant first, and then we'll turn it over to public comments.
Good. Is this on? Okay. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Tia Lewis, and I'm an attorney for the applicant, Central Oregon Irrigation District. Thank you, Tarek, for the staff report and the written staff report. We appreciate the work. I know that this was originally assigned to a different planner, and so we appreciate the work that the county has done to get this to Tarek and have him take it over and get it to you. There were a couple of issues with the staff report, I think, just in the transition that I wanted to mention. One was the label, just for the record, to relabel that as a staff report. And then the other comment that I did want to make is on page 6 of the staff report. There is a discussion about the transportation study. And Peter Russell, the county's transportation planner, had asked Joe to or had submitted some comments on our original traffic study, and our transportation engineer, Joe Bessman, revised the traffic study in accordance with Peter's comments. The staff report indicates that no further comments were offered by the county's senior transportation planner. However, this was prior to the time that Tarek received the file, and Peter Russell did submit a follow-up comment to Joe Bessman indicating that the revisions that he made were what Peter was looking for. That email was dated June 8, and I believe it is in the record. I think Tarek may have just missed it because it was addressed to the prior planner. Other than that, I thought that the findings and discussion in the staff report were accurate. There were a number of places where findings were left for the hearings officer. However, we do believe there's substantial evidence in the record to demonstrate compliance with all of the approval criteria. In fact, it's really the only evidence in the record at this point is the evidence that the applicant has submitted in compliance. I do recognize that there is some public testimony in opposition, and we would like to reserve a brief opportunity for rebuttal to the extent that there are issues raised that we need to address. However, our application is consistent with both the county code as well as the county policy, which has been established to relook at these non-productive agricultural lands and rezone them in the event that they are determined to not be agricultural land, as the soil study has established. It is neither economical nor fiscally responsible for the county to continue to maintain zoning on properties that are no longer that no longer applies to the property. We've shown there's been a change in circumstances. We've also shown that the original soil classifications were based on a much higher scale and less detail than the Order 1 soil survey that was established. And so we are submitting the present application really as a precursor to the urbanization. This property is adjacent to the Bend UGB, adjacent to the Bend city limits, and when the city does go to expand its UGB in the next expansion process, it will be looking for exception lands, and this is a parcel of property that does not qualify as agricultural land. It is an exception land, and it will be considered in the next UGB. And so this present application is simply to facilitate that process as the city goes through it in the next UGB expansion. We have no current plans to develop the property with any of the uses that would be allowed in the MUA 10 zone. However, we recognize that the present application does need to establish that those uses are consistent with the county comprehensive plan, and that the impacts from those potential uses can be accommodated through the infrastructure system in place. So we believe we have done that, and we would ask that the hearings officer issue a recommendation of approval to send this to the county commissioners. And again, we're happy to answer any questions, but we would like to reserve a brief opportunity for rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. I don't have any questions at this time, so we will now turn it over to public testimony.
Sure, and our first public commenter listed is Patrick McCoy, so if you wouldn't mind elevating Patrick, please.
Good evening. I think I made it.
Yes.
Zoom experiences. Good evening. I wanted to join you tonight because I wanted to make sure that you folks were aware of the rest of the area where this proposed change is being made, that there's a lot of development going on in this area already, or there's more development that's coming. I just want to run down a list of properties within a 2-mile radius of my residence, which is I own the second property to the east of the COI property. There's a 34-acre lot owned by Eastside Bend LLC, which is the same company, I believe. I'm sure Tia knows. It's the Stevens Ranch project. So those are the same owners there. So they're from California. I'm sure they're not just buying that property to keep it as a tax write-off. There's 58 acres owned by BCLL LLC on Bear Creek, 37 acres on the Porter Kelly Burns land holdings on Bear Creek. There's 59 acres owned by a gentleman called Harold Markin on Harold Markin Trust, which is just to the north of my property. 59 acres. He's already let his property go dead so that he can meet the requirements. They farmed hay on it for many, many years. And 2 years ago, they stopped planting hay so that the property would go dormant, so they could also ask for a zoning change to develop that property. And then there's 450 acres for Rose and Associates LLC, 197 acres DM Stevenson Ranch, which is down by the dump, and then 44 acres owned by Tom Collier. These properties are all getting ready to do the same thing that the COI is attempting to do. Our little neighborhood is pinned here between Ward and the city limits in the canal. We're just asking that the county slow down the growth in this area. I mean, we have the 382-acre Stevens Ranch project going in over 2 properties to the south of us. The development is just going crazy, and I would hope that we need to slow down the city of Bend a little bit so that their infrastructure work helps to keep up. We're landlocked, basically. I mean, they're overrunning us, and the reason I bought this property was not only for the view that I have, which is spectacular, but it was something I can afford without living on the west side or Aubrey Butte, where you have to be wealthy to live in those areas. So please consider slowing down the growth and turning down this application so that we can have a place to live here. That'll end my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. And we will hear from the next participant.
Yeah. Next in line was Matt Carey, so we'll elevate Matt. Exactly.
I can hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, Zoom's going to do this. I would basically agree with everything Pat said. The development is encroaching on us. I don't know that I have, big reasons. We are absolutely opposed to this and, want that noted. The one biggest probably reason would be is the green space. And there's a lot of animals that are out there and using that space. And as the development comes, it's pushing them out. And just the 7 years we've been here, we've seen a lot less deer and other critters coming through. So, I don't think that's the whole platform for this, but it is definitely a side effect that is going on with this development. And there's a lot of animals out there right now that would be pushed out with that future development. Secondly, obviously, would be is nobody that I know has addressed the egress of how they'll be accessing this property. We see it has a Ward Road address. So I would like if somebody could address that. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Appreciate your comments.
And then lastly, we have Keisha Weaver, who is with Pat McCoy.
Yes. Ms. Weaver? Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Pat again. Hi.
Evening, Ms. Marshall. Thank you for being willing to hear our public comments on our concerns in this matter. We appreciate the opportunity to be involved in this public process. I'd like to, again, just ask you to review our written submitted comments and concerns that were submitted when we learned that this action was being considered. As far as our property, we've had high schoolers recently that have been involved in raising animals for 4-H and FFA. We currently have a small farm here where we raise swine, steer, and then have a small chicken contingency. Our neighbors also support kids raising animals in FFA production and allow their animals to be raised in this area. So really, we are utilizing this area of the county to be actively involved in agriculture and livestock development on a small scale. And, in this area, we do value the slow growth and the rural concept. We have a tight neighborhood. We work to support one another with sharing water rights, assisting one another with trying to maintain a good agricultural community to support our animal growth, as well as the neighborhood concepts. We are in opposition of this growth model because we would like to see the county maintain open spaces and to slow down the rapid development of these large neighborhoods that are being proposed all around us. One thing I wanted to point out is that there are, like Mr. Carey said, a number of wildlife that reside in this area. Deer, bucks, does, fawns. We have a lot of rabbits, jackrabbits, hawks, eagles, and a number of species of birds, including bats. And there's at least one cave on the property that's being considered. We really would like to see the wildlife preserved and considered. There's a concern about how the property would be accessed because Ward Road is technically about 3/4 of a mile from this land, and so it's confusing why it has a Ward Road address when it's really not accessible from Ward Road at all at this point, other than the Canal Road, which is gated. The thing that I would like to say is we would respectfully like this application to be denied at this time in order to slow the growth. And then, as mentioned before, at the time that the urban growth boundary is considered, maybe that's a time to bring it up again for review. But at this time, I would respectfully request that this application be denied. And also at the end of this hearing, I would request that you leave it open for as long as possible, at least the 21-day period, for additional public input for review. Thank you.
Ms. Weaver. Okay.
And those are all the public commenters.
Okay. All right. So I will turn it back to
I
Staff?
I could offer one clarifying statement just
please.
about the addressing.
Yes,
on
yes.
Ward Road. It's unclear exactly where that address originally came from, but the county has an address coordinator, and as part of any kind of review of specific development, so should this be approved or not, if someone came in for any kind of development or specific use assigned to this property, a very preliminary step of that is to get an accurate address assigned to the property that's essentially vetted through emergency services, something that makes sense, exactly as the commenters have said. It would not probably make sense to an ambulance driver if they heard Ward Road and tried to find it. So that's just something that's more on the development permit by permit side that would get addressed should they apply for something in the future, whether it was in conjunction with this subject proposal or not. And that's all I really had, just clarifying the address part.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Lewis?
Thank you. Yes, Tia Lewis again for the record as attorney for the applicant. As I indicated in our original testimony, our plans are simply to change the zoning as a precursor for eventual urbanization and to hold the property until the city brings it inside the UGB for urbanization. It's possible that the district could offer the property for sale whenever the city starts to expand its UGB. People start to speculate on these properties on the urban fringe. And so, technically, it could get developed under the MUA 10 zoning if the district were to offer it for sale prior to that time. However, we currently have no plans to do that, and our plan is to hold it for urbanization. The access issue, as Tarek indicated, it is the Ward Road address was established years ago and would be very unlikely access. There are a number of roads stubbed to the property, and at the time, if there were a development proposal that would come forward, the access would have to be established at that time. We have no current plans to change any property configuration or to develop the property or to change any way that we've accessed it or held it in any way. We will continue to maintain it as vacant land for years until the city expands the UGB. And I don't expect that to happen in the next 2 to 3 years, but we do expect to happen in the next 5. So that's why we're laying the groundwork for this now. I appreciate Ms. Weaver's comments, but at the time that the UGB expands will be too late. There's a priority. As the hearings officer knows, there's a priority classification for UGB expansion land, and resource land, which is what this land is, would be the last priority. So we're currently establishing that this doesn't meet the definition of resource land so that it can be put into a category that the city can consider it on the next UGB expansion. And then lastly, we would oppose any order that would keep the record open at this time, absent some explanation as to why any information couldn't have been submitted into the record between the date of the notice, which was many months ago, and the present hearing, particularly given that this matter has to go before the board and the public will get an opportunity to speak on this matter again before the Board of County Commissioners. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Okay, at this time, I am going to order that the record before me as the hearings officer is closed as of this evening. You stated earlier about submitting materials by the end of the hearing. Did you want to speak to that one more time about if there's any last, so to speak, last-minute submittals?
Yeah, of course.
Because I'm not going to leave the
Yeah,
record.
thank you, Ms. Marshall. So
Yes.
I would say that because now the record is formally closed, that if you did have an exhibit or something that you wanted to be submitted into record as part of what you would have submitted should you have been here in person, like an actual in-person exhibit submittal, you can email that to me. Ideally, it would be great tonight or tomorrow, sometime really soon, but keep in mind that I'm going to retroactively consider that to be exhibits submitted as part of this public hearing since there is not an open record period at this time. And that would be all.
Great. Agreed. I think that sounds fair, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in with COVID and having to do these hearings this way. So if there are any written submissions that you would like to have part of the record, please do submit those tonight, no later than tomorrow. The record is closed. I'm not going to do a 777 period. Because I agree with the applicant that there's no basis for which the record should be held open. And again, this matter will go to the commissioners following my recommendation. So with all of that being said, we will go ahead and close the public hearing. Thank you for those that attended. I appreciate hearing your comments. And I will be reviewing the record as it exists with if there are any last-minute items, get those in ASAP.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms.
you.
Marshall.
You're welcome.